Hi guys, Economies here. Today I'm going to run through an exemplar piece of work for the GCSE Economics. That's Unit A591, the first paper, the microeconomics paper. This is by way of feedback really for my students who have just done their mock exam. So when you're working through your paper, your marked script, when I return it, you need to work through this video and ensure that you have made all the necessary amendments to your own script. This video is by way of general feedback. The more detailed feedback you will find on the front cover sheet of your own paper. So without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, let's get stuck into A591 June 2015. So ladies and gentlemen, this is an example, this is a script which I was sent by Elizabeth Ring, who's the subject leader for OCR GCSE Economics, just to give me an idea as to the standard required for an A-star script. So you can see this candidate has done very well indeed and ultimately scored 50 out of 60, total 60 marks. There are three questions on these papers, as I'm sure you well know, each out of 20, and I think this was a fairly straightforward paper, but let's just have a look through it. So, 1A, from figure 1, identify one example of capital. Now, ships is the correct answer here. Some of my candidates wrote the engine of the ship. Now, the mark scheme is very specific. It has to be the ships. That is the one and only answer for that one. And then identify one example of labour. So you could either have mentioned by name Kevin, who's the operations director, or as this candidate has done, identify both. Again, just read the figure 1 and pull the data out. Very straightforward. 1B part 1. Using the information in figure 1, what could be the opportunity cost of only investing in new ships? Well, obviously, the figure 1 said that they were considering investing in new ships, trains or lorries. So obviously, whichever one you don't invest in is the opportunity cost. So I think the mark scheme said that you could have trains and lorries, or trains or lorries. Again, for 1 mark, just reading from the figure in that instance. 1B part 2. Why do businesses have to make choices when deciding on how to invest? So whenever you see the word choices, you need to be thinking immediately of the basic economic problem of scarcity and choice. What is it that's scarce? Resources are scarce. Or finite. What is it that's infinite? It's people or businesses' wants. And as a consequence of that, choices have to be made. And the decision to go with one particular product rather than another, well, the thing which is given up, as you well know, is the opportunity cost. So if you can incorporate that into your answer, include the terms scarcity, choice, infinite, finite, resources, wants, choices, opportunity cost. If you're going to incorporate that into your answer, you will get the 3 marks. I'm not going to bother reading through that particular answer. 1C. State and explain 2 effects which increased competition might have in a business such as Nike PLC. Not Nike in the swoosh, obviously. So this candidate's written, the effect would be lower revenue, and then gone on to explain it. Increased competition means that the firm is operating in a competitive market. A competitive market has many firms selling a single product or service. In order to, I'm not sure what that says, in order to remove competition possibly, and something sales, businesses must have to ensure that the goods are priced competitively. This often means less than something and then they go on to talk about lower sales leading to lower revenue. It's quite difficult to read parts of that, but the general gist of it is that if you've got increased competition, you then, in order to make yourself more competitive, you need to reduce your prices, and in so doing you're attracting, hopefully, further customers, but your margin obviously per unit is less, and therefore your revenues will fall. And then secondly, what have we got? Secondly, as the effect, they've written increased productivity. Not sure if you can see that there, increased productivity. And the explanation, in times of tough competition, revenue from sales will drop. It is therefore important that business become as cost efficient as possible. This means being more productive and therefore using scarce resources more wisely. There can be eco-friendly divisions, etc., etc. So they've already got the marks on that one. So that's a 3 plus 3. The mark scheme identifies a number of different factors you could have identified there. So you could have had all of these factors here. Prices falling, quantity demanded falling, having to spend more on marketing, advertising and promotion, a fall in the profit or the revenue, becoming more efficient, as we've mentioned, needing to increase quality or innovate. Innovation was a very popular one amongst my students. An extreme effect would be that a business would fail or be taken over, may lose workers, increase costs in terms of marketing, innovation. So all sorts of different potential answers to that one. So that's 1C. 1D. Discuss the extent to which a business such as Nike plc could benefit from achieving increased economies of scale. Now the first thing to note, ladies and gentlemen, is that this is a discussion question. So that means it requires a two-sided discussion. On the one hand, here are all the benefits of economies of scale. On the other hand, here are all the drawbacks which may arise if a company becomes too large in this instance. And then, to close this off properly in your evaluation, you need some type of summative comment, which is a well-argued, well-reasoned conclusion, and not just, in my opinion, economies of scale are better than diseconomies of scale. It's got to be a well-argued, well-reasoned conclusion. So what has this particular candidate written? Nike could benefit significantly from achieving different economies of scale. Company growth could lead to financial economies of scale. Okay, so now we're starting to identify the economies of scale. Remember, the key ones are technical, financial, marketing and risk bearing. So here we've got a financial economies of scale. Reading on, where the firms can buy goods and, should say, borrow money in bulk and at cheaper rates. They could also benefit from technological economies of scale, where they will have more money to invest in capital to make more efficient use of resources. So I think they've got their bulk buying slightly confused there, because of course bulk buying is a sort of a marketing economy of scale, which would help to reduce per unit cost and hence overall costs, which hence leads to lower prices. Anyway, they could also experience managerial economies of scale, where their successful position and pay rates could attract the best managers. Fair point. So managerial economies of scale, getting the best train drivers and ship captains, etc. They could also experience risk-bearing economies of scale, where they have more money to invest in other markets and spread their risk. Very good point, and one which my students often mentioned. Not having all of your eggs in the one basket, as it were. They could, however, also face diseconomies of scale. So when an examiner sees on your script the word however or on the other hand, they know that you're starting into a discussion. So however, diseconomies of scale. This is the idea that the firm can become too big and have negative effects. An example of this could be worker, I'm not really sure what they said there, worker something. If the company grows too much, workers may feel like small fish in a big pond, nice, leading to lower rates of productivity, which will damage the firm. Also, if the firm becomes too big, communication and organisation between the directors could become confused. Again, so that's an example of the diseconomies of scale, which are of course coordination, communication, control and morale, if you can get those into your answer. And then diagram at the bottom, an increase in marketing economies of scale can lead to an increase in demand for Nike's goods. Now, it's really good to put a diagram in, but this diagram, there's a few things. Number one, it's not fully labelled up. Supply curve's not labelled, demand curve's not labelled. And then number two, there's not really any, the explanation to that diagram should be up here somewhere, but it isn't. And really, there's no point including a diagram if you do not include some reference to it. So this candidate has got L3 on this one. So let's just see what they got. 1D, so that's 6 out of 8. And the reason, the obvious reason that they haven't got an 8 out of 8 is because it just stops here and there is no conclusion, there's no evaluation, there's no summing up and weighing up of the arguments. So that's question 1. Let's move on. Question 2. Fill the blanks. Demand is the quantity consumers are willing and able to buy. Easy. 1B. Right. Most of my students answered this well. Other than a change in the cost of materials, explain 2 factors which could lead to a shift in the supply curve. All you've got to know here are the factors which shift the supply curve, and if you know those off by heart, you can see this candidate's written them down the left hand side of their script there. It's good practice. So productivity, increased productivity shifts the supply curve to the right. What have they written for the second one? Weather. Right, so if you're a farmer or something like that and you're growing a harvest, if the weather's bad, supply falls, supply shifts left. Again, very straightforward. That really is an easy question. 2C part 1. Lovely question. So this candidate's only got 3 out of 4. You were asked to draw an initial supply curve. You're told that the cost of raw materials rise, so the supply curve would shift left. This candidate has shifted it left, put the P's in the correct place on the y-axis, the Q's in the correct place on the x-axis. Unfortunately, not labelled the supply curves. And that very elementary basic mistake has cost this candidate 1 mark, which would have taken them 1 mark over the A-star threshold in this instance. So be careful with your diagrams, ladies and gentlemen. Next question. With reference to the diagram, explain what's happened to total revenue. Now, for my students, this was poorly done. The total revenue is the price times the quantity. So at P1, the total revenue is P1 times Q1. At P2, the total revenue is P2 times Q2. Now, whenever the supply curve shifts to the left, because the demand is very price inelastic, quantity demanded falls by, look, you can see it there, it's a tiny little amount. Price rises quite significantly. So the rise in the price is much greater than the fall in quantity demanded, hence the total revenue will increase. The total revenue falls from the original, you're losing that little sliver there, and you're gaining this big rectangle here. So it's pity I can't annotate on this. But as a consequence of that, the answer is that because the price elasticity of demand is inelastic, quantity demand doesn't fall off very much, price rises significantly, so total revenue in total goes up. Next question. D. So now we're into the essay discussion question. The costs and benefits to specialising for an individual. What are the costs and benefits of specialisation? Again, it's a discuss question, so it requires a on the one hand, on the other hand. Let's see what this candidate ended up with. So again, this looks like an L3. Let me just flick up to see what they got. 2D. Again, 2D, 6 out of 8. So again, this candidate losing marks because he or she has not evaluated and concluded. So what have they said? There are many costs and benefits to a worker that is specialised. Firstly, the costs. Specialisation of labour means that she will be doing one repetitive job all day. This can be boring and not particularly motivating. She will probably have a loss of motivation. I think that's what that says. Secondly, in the examples, unskilled specialised work can lead to low wages due to the supply of labour being elastic. Yeah, very good point to get in about the elasticity of supply of labour being relatively elastic for the unskilled and highly inelastic for the skilled. So contrast the skilled with the unskilled and give examples of particular occupations which may be in that particular sector. So those are the costs. This candidate has said is very repetitive. The mark scheme does focus a lot on the sort of the boredom aspect and the fact that you're doing something day in, day out, the same thing, not very inspiring, and so you become demotivated. You could talk about the quality of your work deteriorating. However, so this is the indicative of the on the other hand discussion. There are also benefits to specialisation. Repetitiveness of producing cakes will lead to the firm increasing productivity. This will certainly lead to the business growing, which could therefore result in the workers earning more wages. Okay, fair enough. Secondly, repetition at the job will lead to Lauren becoming skilled at cake making. This can lead to career value rising as other firms try to employ her. Yes, so you can talk all about the point that should be very, very skillful in her job. Potentially could seek higher rewards from her current employer or maybe poached from an alternative employer and hence get a higher wage. And again, this candidate, lovely to see a diagram as I've said before, but again, no labels and no real reference to the diagram above. It's always good practice to bang a diagram in whenever you can, and I would really encourage my students to do that in the 1D questions, but having a diagram with no explanation is just the same as having no diagram, really. So if you're going to put a diagram in, do make sure that you explain it. Okay, I'm going to stop it there and come back in the next video with the final question 3.